still not being completely comfortable with conflict, but capable of having adult relationships and not being run over by others. I don't want to say anything positive about myself because it will make me seem arrogant. Clement was a clean-cut and professionally dressed man in his early 30s who scheduled an appointment with a therapist due to some vague unhappiness and martial tension that appeared to be some fuzzily defined depression or lack of energy about life. Upon the initial assessment visit, the therapist was informed by Clement that he could not put his finger just on what was wrong with his life. He had an attractive wife by anyone's definition. He has healthy, well-behaved children and has a thriving mortgage business that has provided him an income well into the mid and high six-figure range. He recounted a long struggle with career setbacks on the way to getting where he is now and on having a career and on having to reinvent himself a couple times after having good jobs that ended due to buyouts and reorganizations before starting a new career as a mortgage broker. The therapist noted that Clement was strangely passive about claiming several apparent successes at reorganizing his life, and the very obvious strength of will displayed at continually fighting through these unfortunate setbacks that were no fault of his own. He also seemed strangely subdued about his accomplishments and the resourcefulness, talent, responsibility, and the drive it took to achieve this success. He appeared to take no pride in having a nice house in the suburbs, a beautiful wife who admired and respected him, well-behaved children, and a thriving practice that he built from the ground up into a very successful business. When asked why he seemed to be almost rejecting his rightful reward, Clement became uncomfortable and shifted in his seat, saying, "I don't want to talk about what I have and what I've accomplished to anyone because I just think it makes me sound arrogant, like I'm bragging or something." One of the most commonly seen struggles in my office over the years, especially with individuals who have sincerely embraced a personal faith and who are trying to live it out on a daily basis, is how to come to a coherent and practical definition of what it means to be either humble or arrogant. The struggle is not limited to those who attended Christian churches or practiced some other faith, though. It can be seen from plenty of other people who are just considerate, compassionate, and socially aware of the feelings of others, who don't want to come across as insensitive blowhards that toot their own horn to the annoyance of others. Both terms deserve to be explored and defined, both practically and usefully, for those who are concerned about how they are perceived by those around them, and who want to live with integrity and true character. Hopefully, we can do just that in the paragraphs to come. My experience has been that these terms rarely get this kind of thoughtful and logical exploration, however. They are usually superficially thought through and get an emotional interpretation and eventual application that causes people depressive symptoms and issues in relationships that diminish one's energy and investment in life. Since I identify publicly as a Christian counselor / psychotherapist, I am confronted with the concept of humility regularly by people who are worried about embracing the concept appropriately and avoiding calling untoward attention to themselves, just like Clement. The boilerplate interpretation of what humility is believed to be by avoiding any The boilerplate interpretation of what humility is believed to be is avoiding any public or personal claims about your strengths or accomplishments or talents and being very careful to deflect any credit for any of them to God or someone else. People will go to great lengths to deny any and all possible positive things about themselves to accomplish this. In short, they see humility as not just carefully avoiding speaking about oneself in a loud and grandiose manner around others, but to deny any successes altogether completely. In this model, humility is at least a social attribute first and foremost, and means avoiding any mention of success for fear of offending others who have less in life financially, physically, professionally, or personally. Sometimes it is a deep-seated fear of criticism or being disliked from the same people. With the element of faith included, it usually means that the person is trying not to claim any credit for anything they believe that God Himself has either blessed them with or developed within them. This is out of fear that they may be stealing the credit that He deserves and will run afoul of the Almighty and receive a rightful blast of anger for displaying and embracing the sin of arrogance. They believe that all that occurs in their life is not justified by God's grace and power and then turned over to them to enact, but that the whole process is fully engineered and caused by Him. They believe they have no right to claim any of what they believe they created. They believe they have no right to claim any of what they believe they had no creative stake in. While I sincerely appreciate the good intentions of both positions, I also sincerely believe that these beliefs are distorted and end up causing all kinds of social and interpersonal problems for the people that hold them so strongly and try to practice them. Let's tackle these two beliefs about offending others in a social sense and also offending one's God by assuming any responsibility for one's successes by first looking at the flip side of humility and examining what arrogance is believed to be and what it truly is. Most people would see these as being two sides of the same coin, and that this coin either flips up in the air and lands on one side or the other, and that you are either arrogant to speak well of yourself openly, or humble to avoid ever doing so. It is seen as an either-or proposition with only two options, and neither really seems good on an emotional level, or it wouldn't come up so frequently in sessions. I would argue that putting arrogance and humility on opposite sides of a coin is making the subject too simplistic, and that the practical interpretation is slighting the reality that there are more options here than two. If any statement of skill, talent, success, effort, intelligence, or wisdom is an example of arrogance, then one cannot ever morally assert anything positive about themselves and must then logically wait for someone else to affirm these good things about them. And then they are honor bound to deny the truths of whatever is said about them, or that's arrogance by proxy, as you are subtly agreeing openly and publicly with them. This means that no one can ever make any testimony of legitimate qualifications or talents on a professional level to begin with. There is a recent commercial getting a lot of airplay where a patient was being prepared to go into the operating room and he meets the surgeon, who first entered the room with flippant, "Guess who's been reinstated again?" and responds to this now frightened man's statement that he's anxious about the immediate surgery by giving him a somber look downwards and admitting, "Me too," before leaving the room. The patient is rightfully now very, very anxious, and the commercial ends with this poor man sitting on the dressing table with his mouth open in complete shock and horror. While this is a humorous example, what would the world be like if no one was allowed to attest to their own competence and ability? Not only that, but if we would have to deny or deflect when others attest to our character or skill or work ethic. This would absolutely destroy the collective public confidence in all manner of individual professionals and eliminate the need for reassurance in them. And would eliminate the necessary need for reassurance in them. It would also limit any reasonable advertisement of what someone would and could do as far as services or producing goods. We would have almost a complete We would have almost a complete moratorium on advertising, as advertising is making a claim about one's skills, characters, and work ethic. Speaking about oneself fairly in a positive way inspires the necessary confidence in others about you. Furthermore, letting others know what your credentials are is a necessary thing in order to do basic business. Demonstrating and calling attention to the traits and efforts that brought success is inspiring and informative to others and conveys confidence and collective security. Curtailing this out due to a misguided desire to avoid arrogance would be tragic indeed. I would argue that an accurate view of arrogance would be to commit an act that is dishonest at its core regarding how you represent yourself to others around you. Arrogance should be seen as deliberately exaggerating your own talent, your own accomplishments, or your own character, or tearing down someone else's, for the purpose of getting respect, credit, or a status that you have not legitimately earned. An example of this in the counseling profession is when someone has claimed to be a licensed therapist when they haven't gone through the process of accumulating the supervision and client hours needed, and they haven't passed the rigorous examination to actually earn it. I think it's fair to say that conflating one's own self for the purpose of getting status that is unearned is truly a form of arrogance. On an interpersonal level, you would experience someone being arrogant when they overstate who they are or what they've done for the purpose of one-upping either someone around them for either one's own narcissistic ego or to diminish someone else for one's own emotional gratification. I have told the story frequently in my sessions of a guy I knew in high school who claimed to be a black belt in Japanese karate. I have detailed that story in a previous chapter in this book. However, the gist of the story was that the guy had clearly and deliberately fabricated his credentials completely for the sake of getting respect and admiration through lying and arrogance in order to gain something that he hadn't earned. If someone plainly and honestly stated their credentials as a martial artist and represented their training, skill set, and fighting accomplishments, I would not consider it an example of arrogance in the least. Honesty being the key word here. On the other side of the coin, a one-dimensional definition of humility suggests that someone embracing this virtue would similarly require you to avoid saying anything positive about yourself and actually undervalue yourself publicly to others to achieve it. Imagine this. To be humble, you actually have to embrace some sort of noble dishonesty and diminish yourself deliberately in front of others. We're not talking about being gracious about receiving compliments and maybe toning them back to a level of accuracy either. We're talking about seeing humility as a deliberate and untruthful portrayal of yourself as something less than you actually are. For example, if someone asked me to describe myself professionally and assess myself, I would assert myself as a very experienced family therapist who is fairly talented and advanced in I would assert myself as a very experienced family therapist who is fairly talented at advanced cognitive behavioral therapy and who is also good at getting to the core of people's depression. But with this model of humility, I would be forced to either refuse to give myself any positive credit for the skills that or experience I have either deflecting. I would be forced to either refuse to give myself any positive credit for skills or experience I have by either deflecting the question altogether or telling you that I'm not all that and really have a lot to learn actually, or that there are a lot of better therapists out there. Parts of these statements may be true, but it's not a true reflection of my legitimate ability and worth, and would be absolutely of no value to anyone trying to figure out if I can help them. Now, if I claim to be the best cognitive behavioral therapist in the state of Alabama, depending on the circumstances, I may not even be the best in my own office, or stated that I am comprehensively trained in all forms of mood disorders, no one is that I know of. and I am the best choice for anyone needing treatment, I have zero experience with eating disorders, for instance, then I would be incredibly arrogant and lacking in humility. Trying to find that accurate place where you rate in the pecking order, personally and professionally, for objective sense of self-worth seems to me to be quite an example of humility. Knocking yourself down to a lower and inaccurate place is false humility, and actually seems like a strange sort of arrogance in that you would be trying to get credit for excessive humility in front of others. So how much fun this can be? See how much fun this can be? So let's see if we can put the top back on the bottle of shaken up soda and define arrogant and humble once and for all, or at least for the purpose of trying to answer the question pragmatically. It seems that taking all the elevators down to the ground floor would leave us with a very simple truth that arrogance is being dishonest about who you are and what you've done. Humility is an honest and objective assessment of one's attributes and accomplishments. Arrogance is dishonest and humility is honest, and that is the ground floor. It's that simple. It would make the world much simpler and be a better functioning place if we just all agreed to see it this way and stopped embracing the social anxiety and fear of criticism that causes us to fall into a false humility that ends up taking root inside and causes all kinds of internal conflicts and eventual depressive symptoms. The result of this disordered view of humility and arrogance is depression and lack of interest in the world around you. This is exactly what happened with Clement. He became divorced from his own experience and processes throughout his adult years and neglected to claim and internalize all the hard work, self-discipline, skill, talent, charisma, and his ability to delay gratification to accomplish things of importance to take care of others. As a result, Clement created a world where he continually defeats himself and cannot win. Why would you wake up every morning with enthusiasm, energy, and passion to accomplish and experience wonderful things each day when you've already decided that to do so will amount to absolutely nothing inside yourself, and you'll have to erase any points you put up on the scoreboard the moment you score the touchdown? Taking this route would mean that you could not enjoy the process of success, nor the fruit from the tree you worked so hard to plant. It also diminishes your self-confidence and limits your relationships as well. Again, what's your motivation to live daily life with any energy if you cannot claim and enjoy any victories? The real issue is to be careful not to claim victories that you have not truly won or trophies you haven't really earned, and doing this, in my humble opinion, ensures that you will be truly humble. Clement's views about humility and arrogance were deep-seated and hard to untrench, despite him slowly seeing just how deeply distorted his view of humility had worked its way through his life, and how much subtle misery it caused both himself and those around him. He continued both to deflect any and all of his positive accomplishments, and also the clear and empirical proven character traits that caused these things to happen for months and months. Slowly, however, with the constant reinforcement from the therapist and his wife in sessions that humility is not denying objective truth about himself or his life, and that it is perfectly acceptable to tastefully claim the good things he had done or become. Clement turned a corner and began to evolve personally. He specifically responded to the truth that he could both feel good about his life and who he had become, and still accept within his Christian faith that he was unworthy to stand in the presence of the Almighty, as they were not mutually exclusive values. Clement's mood began to improve, and he began feeling the dark clouds over his head, letting more and more sunshine through, and he started enjoying his daily life, and began to see himself as successful and productive. His wife reported that his self-confidence improved, and that he was less agitated and more patient with her and their children and their romantic life began to spark. Clement started enjoying his daily life experiences and was no longer afraid to feel good about them. He closed out with counseling after about 8 months of sessions, and he felt that he was no longer depressed. He left a much more relaxed and happier man for changing his view from, I don't want to seem arrogant by saying anything positive about myself, to, I may be careful saying positive things about myself publicly to not seem like I'm bragging, but I'm going to own and value what I have accomplished and who I have become inside myself and carry myself accordingly. I really didn't have a choice.